Hi there, out there on Facebook, YouTube. Good to see you. Welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour. Good to have you here. I'm here in a Zoom call with our guests for today. We're letting people sort of notice the stream so they can start paying attention. We're going to let some people into the Zoom room here in our live studio audience, as it were, and Zoom here. I'll let the folks in. And spotlight myself, and I will spotlight our guest for today as well. And in a moment, we'll introduce the program so you know what you've gotten yourself into, and start talking about pianos and music and artistry and all sorts of wonderful topics. This is Piano Tech Radio Hour. If you haven't been here before, that's where you are. Yeah, again, just kind of letting people get cozy and comfortable. I'm going to make sure that Justice, I'll make sure you have co-host access so you can let folks in if I can't. There you go. All right. And then I'll make sure got our intros and outros all set to go. And I do. Here we go. Welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour. We gather here every Saturday to meet with and learn from the most fascinating and knowledgeable folks in the piano world and music world, including manufacturers, rebuilders, musicians, makers of other instruments, and of course, piano techs. Our mutual goal is to become better at our craft, to help each other, and to create an ever more musical world together. Piano Tech Radio Hour is brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, an online learning resource that brings you cutting-edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. You can find out more at pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. And you can also subscribe to Radio Hour for just $16 a month. It gives you direct access to each week's private Zoom call, as well as all the archival recordings of over 200 episodes in our member area. Join using the link bit.ly/joinptrh. That's bit.ly/joinptrh. Also, just don't forget the podcast version of the show. That's audio only, but very convenient to be listening in the car, in the shop. We're popular all over the globe. We've reached the tops of the charts in the performing arts category in iTunes and several places. And that's been very fun with the global reach. I'll also mention that you should check out the blog. That's on Substack. Search our name on Substack. You'll find out we talk about that technical side of pianos that you might not find anywhere else. You get a peek into that on Substack. You could decide whether you want to subscribe to some of the lectures that we have privately. And check us out on the social. LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter are all places that you can find us. All right, let's introduce our guest for today. And his name is Tim Judd. So he's a violinist with the Richmond Symphony since 2001. He's performed with top orchestras, including the Syracuse Symphony, Virginia Symphony, and Albany Symphony. He has shared the stage with artists like Gil Shaham, Renee Fleming, André Watts, and more. A dedicated teacher, he has maintained a private studio for over 2 decades and contributes to classical music appreciation through his blog, The Listeners Club. Welcome, Timothy Judd, to the program. Hi, how you doing, Tim?
Hey, great. Great to be here, Ethan.
Yeah, thanks for making time to meet with us. And we were doing a little bit of pre-show chatting in the green room, as it were. I'm excited to dive into the classical world and kind of what you've seen from it, especially, it's been some decades here. You've been at it, and curious to see how things are changing. But before we go into what's going on right now, I always love to kind of get some background about, what was little Timothy Judd like. I know you teach Suzuki now. You started on in Suzuki violin. Did you take some other instruments? And how soon did you know that music was going to be such a central focal point in your life?
Well, I really had music in my life from the very beginning. My parents were public school music teachers. My dad is a trombonist and my mother's a singer. And she also gave piano lessons as I was growing up. So I was hearing many hours of piano lessons in the house after school. And I happened to be very lucky to live south of Rochester, New York, with the Eastman School of Music, and the Suzuki method was the way I started. I started at the age of 4 years old with Anastasia Gemplis at the Eastman School of Music, and she actually worked with Dr. Shinichi Suzuki in Japan and was sort
Wow.
of one of the pioneers of the method. And a lot of people, of course, now really are very familiar with Suzuki, but in case there's anyone here that isn't, I can talk about the general philosophy.
Yep.
The
Definitely.
idea is that you build up the ear first. So Suzuki's concept was the mother tongue approach, where we all learn to speak by just hearing the language, and then very naturally pick that up. And so he kind of had the idea that students could just as naturally pick up musical ability by hearing it, just by being exposed to it and having the ear develop. So there's a delayed sense of note reading. The note reading comes in later and is probably enhanced by the fact that the ear is developed. But we really focus on the ear first. And the other aspect of the Suzuki method, of course, as you know, because I think you told me that your son is
Yep.
a Suzuki cellist, Ethan, is the importance of the parent. It's a real triangle between the teacher, the student, and the parent involvement is absolutely essential. So the parent comes to every lesson, kind of takes notes, watches the lesson, the teacher shows what should be done, and then the parent becomes the surrogate teacher at home for the daily practice session. So I was brought up in this method, and I had it was an hour drive to Rochester from the small town where I grew
Wow.
up. It's kind of in the Finger Lakes area, on the edge of the Finger Lakes area, an absolutely beautiful part of the country, with these long lakes that were dug out by glaciers. And in that hour to Rochester in the snow and everything else, first of all, it was a great time to bond with the parent, with my mom, who was always driving me. And I think that was something I look back on, very fondly, those trips. And then her work with me, at home, kind of teaching me how to practice, so that when I got a little bit older, the practice habits were instilled.
Hmm. That's amazing. Yeah. What a great opportunity. That school, the Suzuki method, the teacher that you had, her connection with it. That's all very wonderful. Yeah. Just to share a little bit about my experience, um, some of the aspects of our lessons that I found interesting. And of course, this is different across instruments or Suzuki piano and other things. But um, my son was taught to hold the bow as his lessons. He was also started very young, and that was playing the cello. We hardly put our hands on the cello, and you just have this bow, and they called it bow games, and you're just walking the bow around and leaning it and tilting it and trying to strengthen their little hands and make sure they have the right grip and all that stuff. And you're singing songs. The songs are, though, songs that you play eventually. So there's a lot of, hey, learn how to sing the songs, learn the words to the songs, learn how they go, be able to name them, if the teacher's playing them, all these fun little things. And then he finally got started playing, and it takes a while. His little fingers are not strong, but he's getting there. Of course, they got those cute little cellos, he started on like the smallest ones. And now you're at a point where he hasn't been reading music. He's learned to read note, like rhythms, but he'll have a song. It's the next song that he's supposed to learn how to play. He learned how to sing it, and he's been singing it for years. And now his little fingers just play it.
And
That's what you're
and
talking
the
about.
fingers know where the notes are by the ear. The ear
Exactly.
is involved, so that ear fingerboard connection. And it sounds like you have a great teacher, because it's so important to build up that foundation, rather than jumping in and throwing everything together, to build up the bow hand
Yeah.
and all those things.
Yeah, it's very fun to watch. Um, and of course, it's an interesting position to be an adult musician learning. a new instrument like that with a kid. Um, Actually, it's an interesting question to ask you. I I can play the things, because I can figure it out, and maybe my hand position is not great or whatever, but I don't at this point in our list, I don't have to practice a lot to be able to sit down and play the song. I can kind of play it by ear, things like that. First of all, is that common that you also have the parent playing as well, or is it more they're just learn how it works and coach them along, and they're not necessarily learning how to play the instrument alongside of it?
Well, there is a tradition of the parent really playing in the beginning. I don't do that so much. I don't find it necessary for what I do. I find it just
Sure.
necessary that the parent is able to help set up, the bow hold and all of that.
Yeah.
That's more important.
And on top of that, I'm also like always kind of curious. I know it can vary depending on the student, but the approach to, encouraging the child and helping them to feel like potent with their playing, right? Because we'll both be playing the song next to each other, and sometimes I find myself, well, maybe I'll just make a few mistakes here so that he can feel empowered that he's doing well, or I'll play very softly. Oh, I was playing too loud and that was throwing him. I'll play very softly and let him take the lead. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I'm actually curious because I don't always know how to both be there and participate, but give him the confidence that he needs as his little fingers and brain are still working on these things.
That's an interesting question. So you're talking about motivation and confidence.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
well, I think the confidence comes, what I try to do in my teaching is develop, first of all, a sense of the sound from the very beginning. And Suzuki was very big on this. He had what he called tonalization, which he took from vocalization, which a singer, doing the exercises. And he has all these ring exercises where, so the idea of really falling in love with that sound from the beginning, and the way you produce the sound in a way that's making the string ring to its fullest. So I think that sort of, as the student starts to tap into that sound, and it comes through concept, and it comes through concept of relaxation physically, but also what you want to hear. That starts to build probably the confidence, because then the sound sort of takes over, and the sense of energy in the sound. I would say also that is a student can put the bow on the string, and they can just kind of pull the bow across the string and listen. But what I try to get is, rather than an sound, a toe sound, where that energy is there. That sort of starts to, I think, give the student the confidence, and then it sort of just builds from there. And the other great thing about the Suzuki series of pieces, the 10 books for violin, is the sense of everything just building beautifully, one step to the next. So it's beginning with folk songs, and of course, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star variations. And by the time you get going, you're doing the Bach double concerto, Vivaldi concertos, and of course finishing up with Mozart concertos. So it really takes you into an advanced place as a student.
Wonderful. I'd love to kind of shift the topic a little bit because there's a bunch of things that we can cover here during the session. You're maintaining a blog, and I'm just kind of curious the origins. A lot of people, I feel like the emergence of blogging was started to happen a decade or two ago. It was like this thing that evolved, and now like people are getting into podcasting now, like kind of like they were getting into blogging. But I'm just curious, like what prompted getting started, and what's been your approach to it, doing the blog?
Well, my blog, The Listeners Club, at thelistenersclub.com, and I do it 3 times a week, 3 posts a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It's, of course, no charge. Sometimes people think the subscription or something like that is a charge, but
Mhm.
it's completely free. And really, in talking to my parents and the students of my parents, I was just, I try to always get them to come to the concerts. I've got comp tickets that I'm often offering them, and they're very happy to come. They have a great time when they come to
Mhm.
our concerts with the Richmond Symphony. But I'm
And
always
I'll just
aware.
butt in here real quick. I'm
Yes.
going to share screen and just scroll through it a little bit while you talk. So you can
Okay,
continue to
that's
talk,
great.
but it might be fun to kind of
To get
peruse
to
the
see.
site. Yeah, we'll just keep talking. Go for it.
So I was starting to become aware that these pieces that I know, so well, Beethoven symphonies and Mahler symphonies, um, they really didn't know these pieces. Some of them had never heard them before. Uh, and of course, in the course of doing the blog, I've come in contact with a lot of pieces that I had not heard before, and I've learned a lot just in researching. And but the idea is, I'm providing some information on the pieces, but I'm not really trying to teach you. The objective is not to teach you about the piece or about the composer necessarily, but the pure objective is to bring you to the music. So it's about putting the music out there.
Hmm.
If someone comes to the blog and they skip everything I've written and just go right to the piece, that's fine.
Hmm.
That would be a success. But it's
Sure.
just putting that out there and hopefully giving you a little bit of something to draw you in, enough of a background about each piece. And I kind of just take whatever I feel like doing. Sometimes there's some jazz that gets in there. Once in a while, I take a rock song, that I think like
Hmm.
I love Yes and
Hmm.
some other rock bands like that. But for the most part, it's a classical music blog. But I'm very free with the music that I choose, and I just try to have a wide variety. And just basically, it is about listening. Like what I did from a very early age. I mean, I was listening constantly to the music that was in the background in the house, but also to recordings. Of course, back then it was records and then CDs, but um, it's really an effort to do that, to put that great music out in front of people and let them get as excited as I have.
Wonderful. And can you explain for our audience what a CD is? No, just kidding.
Okay. I have to do
I,
that with my young students. Yes.
we're totally in that time now, right? Where it's like the younger people, they just like CDs. What is
Yeah.
that? um, so this is interesting, and it's quite a commitment. I mean, that we have a commitment here. That I've made a commitment here, basically, to come and have a guest every week and put on a program and send out some messages about it. And it's 3 times a week is often. It depends on who you are, if that feels like a lot or not. But how I don't know if you mentioned how long has it been going first? Yeah, how long have you been doing
Let's
it?
see. I think it was around 2011. I can't remember. I'm almost to
Wow.
2000 close. I'm coming up on,
Oh my
but
gosh.
so yeah, I think I know I kind of missed the early blog days. A lot of people had blogs, and so I
Hmm.
kind of came in after that. But I'm hoping that it is fulfilling a kind of something useful. And a lot of people kind of are floating around online and find these posts and are
Hmm.
kind of drawn in to the piece.
And did you commit to 3 posts a week from the beginning, or did you just kind of feel it out? Like, how did it evolve?
Think in the very beginning, I think it was once a month. And
Mm-hmm.
if you go back to the very early part of the blog, I put some teaching ideas. I didn't really know what it was going to be in the beginning.
Hmm.
It was part of my regular website initially, and I kind of started it with some practice things in the very beginning, a few of the very early posts.
Hmm.
Um, then I thought that was going to be a part of the blog would be this listening aspect, and then I realized that really was the blog. That was what it was meant to be. So
Hmm. And did you do writing about music before that? Was there some foundation to this? Was it maybe something you did in sort of academic setting, or was this kind of your own? foray into let me write about music, extensively. Did you get my
I mean,
question?
I really didn't do much writing. I've always been interested in writing, and I've been, but this really was the beginning of seriously writing about music.
And, and I'm sure there's aspects, if there didn't have to be, but what have you noticed, if anything, about how you've grown as a musician or a person by just kind of having this commitment, right? You're coming up with topics, you're writing about them, you probably have to maybe do some research. Um, have you found anything interesting, again, if anything, about how this has affected you? Of course, it affects the audience, but it probably kind of circles back to you, and it's been a bit of a growth process.
Well, I think anytime there's a routine like that, it affects you as far as just the structure of your week, because it does kind of really give me that deadline for those 3 days. And I've learned a lot of pieces that I probably would not have known. I mean, I start to work on one blog post and start to go in one direction. In the course of thinking about a particular piece, I'll learn about maybe two or three others that I really didn't know, just in the course of,
Hmm.
sometimes it's just what's popping up on YouTube around
Hmm.
it. I write posts or offer them for our upcoming Richmond Symphony concerts, and so I'm often um, uh, putting blogs out on whatever piece we're coming up on. We have a great orchestra here in Richmond, and a really great music director, Valentina Pileggi, who is a young Italian conductor. And we're just very, very lucky right now. The orchestra is really growing, and the community is growing. But I have been involved a little bit with Valentina and the orchestra in talking to the audience and getting on some uh, Zoom sessions like this to talk about our programming.
Hmm.
So that's been a
Great,
lot of.
great. And yeah, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit obsessed about this particular topic. I feel like one more question, and maybe we'll move on to something else. But um, once you have that much content, you can repurpose it in a lot of interesting ways. You could have a podcast where you're basically reading through it like it's a script, or adapting it for like a podcast situation. A lot of people, once they built that much content, you can put a book together, selections from it, things like that. Um, have you thought about any of those other kind of next level applications of what you built?
I've thought a little bit about it, but I think right now I just kind of chug away at what I'm doing, because I am teaching so much as well, and playing. So those three aspects of what I do. At this point, I couldn't really probably take on anything else, but it is interesting to think about the possibilities. I do try to do it in a way that the music is the star. So I kind of just put it right out there. I think there are some interesting things that could be done on a podcast where I'm talking about particular passages. And of course, the old Carl Haas episodes, I find that probably what I do is, without thinking about it, kind of patterned after that, because
Hmm.
he did such a great job back in the radio days of bringing people to music that way, with adventures in good music on the radio.
Yeah, that's it. It's got a Beethoven. It's got the Beethoven piece as the intro and outro, right?
Sonata, yeah.
Yeah, such a wonderful piece to have to hear over and over again. It's a great choice. Um, well, this is sort of on the same topic, but just straying away from the actual blogging aspect of it. But I'm always curious to find out an insider in the sort of classical or concert music world. What's the perspective there? How are things looking? How have they changed? You've been doing this for a few decades now, professionally in different circumstances. Have you noticed a way that things are evolving, or the audiences are changing, or the ways that they're being reached are changing? Any comments to make, sir? Make there?
One thing that I can think about is, that probably is not that earth-shattering, but we're starting to use iPads
Hmm.
instead of And I've done that for a couple concerts. There are a few people in the orchestra that have started to do that, and then you're on your own stand and you're hitting the foot pedal, which I in one concert double hit the foot pedal, and luckily there was a rest so I could go back. But it is a great tool. For the most part, I still use paper. But as far as the audience, I think the more things change, the more they stay the same in a way. I think if you put great music out there with a great conductor, a dynamic conductor that's able to really bring that to life, people will come and they will love it. And I think I think there's a danger of gimmicks. I think there's a danger of trying to go in a direction of thinking that a particular gimmick will sell something. There's great ideas with kind of making things more casual and all of that. And we have a great series where we do that with the Richmond Symphony in Hardywood Craft Brewery. And the concerts are great. And it's bringing music to that different audience. And I think as long as the music is the center of it, which it is, that's successful. I think when you think that the gimmick will sell it, I think there is a danger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I feel like, with technology and social media just grabbing so intensely at our attention every day, it's so easy to that's where your attention goes, on a screen, on a computer, things like this. But I think it's exactly like you said, it's not for a lack of people actually enjoying or being enriched by those other experiences. So if you can sort of just put it in front of them, in these different scenarios, and they can get the access to it, you really can't go wrong, like you said, if it's just quality content, quality music, quality arts, quality performances. People connect with them. There's a reason, again, at least with the classical repertoire that has been around for so long, But yeah, that's a really good point. Now, when it comes to your experiences, in terms of playing with different groups, can you kind of mention what that's been like? Also, like having a career with the one orchestra, is it kind of just, it's almost like a salary position, right? Or like
Yes.
an ongoing gig. I'd love to hear your perspective on sort of playing in one scenario as like just an ongoing gig, your job. It's like the person going to, make widgets or, do the accounting, you're a musician and you're just kind of doing it as a job. I'd love to hear about that as well as kind of your experiences outside of your main orchestra at the moment.
Well, obviously in the beginning before I came to Richmond, I was doing a lot of playing with many different orchestras when I was studying at Eastman in my graduate. I did undergraduate and master's there. And I was going up and down the New York State Thruway and playing in the Erie Philharmonic and a little bit in Buffalo. I played for Yes at Art Park there. That was
Oh, that must have been fun.
memorable. And I played Guys and Dolls and things like that. So you were at a different place every day. You were driving every week, and I played in Albany a little bit as a sub. And so that was very interesting, doing all those different things. Now I am really settled here, and the more the teaching builds, the more I kind of am staying with the Richmond Symphony.
Mm-hmm.
But it is it's every week is a different thing. I mean, we're doing Pops concerts, of course, where we're playing for a lot of movies in the last few seasons. A lot of where we play and accompany the film.
Oh yes, I've never actually done this. I've heard of this, and it sounds very fun. Yeah.
Yeah, and the conductors have to be very good because if you get behind the film, and they never do, they're always right with the film, but the film keeps going. So, but,
Yeah, that's really fun. Yeah, one of our community members, Larry Lobel out in California, he works with Skywalker Sound in in the sort of Bay Area in the mountains there, and I got to go visit briefly and see their production area. But yeah, it's such a wonderful opportunity to sync the music with the film. And are you in such a position where you can't even really look at the screen, you just gotta look at the music, or like you got to face the listeners, and so that's not part of your experience, or is there some way that you're enjoying it as well? How does that work?
Well, sometimes we are, depending on where I am on the stage, because we rotate in the Richmond Symphony. We rotate between first and second violin, so we're back and forth depending on the concert. We have a rotating system. If I'm in front of the screen, I can see it. It depends on what the film is. If it's a John Williams score, you don't have much time to look at the screen because there's so many notes. But yeah, it's an interesting experience. It's really
Wonderful. And what is it? What is it like working for an orchestra in terms of the schedule? Is it a lot of independent practice? I guess once you get pieces under your guys' belt, you probably don't, I don't know if you have to rehearse them much, or what's the schedule like? Is there a 9 to 5 aspect, or is it mainly these evening performances and a rehearsal here and there?
it's really a compressed schedule. I think sometimes when people play in a student orchestra in college, they're able to rehearse a program for maybe a month or so, and then they do the concert, and there's a very leisurely, good schedule where you can get everything into your fingers. And in a professional orchestra, it's very, very compressed. So whatever is being played that weekend is usually starting on Wednesday or Thursday of the week. With double rehearsals, we have often we'll have 2 on Thursday, 2 on Friday, and 1 on Saturday morning, or maybe it will be backed up starting Wednesday. But so there's a lot of repertoire to be learned. There's always, it seems like, something new to be learned, and it's very important to stay ahead of it, so that you're once in a while you have to really scramble and learn something at the last minute, but it's much better to really be organized and stay ahead. So there's a tremendous amount of practicing at home that goes on to prepare for those rehearsals. Sometimes it's a piece that you've played before and it's sort of easier to get it into your fingers, but then you're always trying to push yourself to get to that even better level with it. But often there are tricky sections that no matter how many times you've played them, you come back and it requires a lot of work. So that's sort of the homework, and then the rest of it is getting put together in that rehearsal process.
Of course you're teaching younger people. What's the age range? And are you also, I guess, teaching adults too? It depends on the teacher, what your studio's like. I guess that's a preface to my next questions. What's the range of students that you tend to work with?
Well, I have 3-year-olds all the way up to adults. I have students that are, very advanced, that are heading into college. That's one aspect. And then the young children that we're trying to really give them that great foundation and take them along. And then adult beginners who I love working with, who pick it up sometimes in their 50s because they always wanted to play the violin. And we do the same process and take them through that process. I have 2 adults right now who actually started with me with the Twinkles and are now playing Vivaldi concertos. So
that's amazing.
That's very exciting.
I have a special place in my heart for adult beginners of anything, especially creative things, taking on an instrument, practicing an art or acting, comedy, like all of these things. I feel like it's so easy not to. It's so easy to talk about how you always wanted to do it. I have recently, it was recently, I say, but it was in the past year or two, because you go and you tune people's pianos and then you come back 6 months later or whatever. And there's a woman and she's, well, I've gotten retired, and I'm thinking about taking lessons. And I'm like, well, let's get you taking some lessons. And I'll introduce you to this teacher and this teacher. Well, and also, but I don't know, I'm I'm very busy. I have a grandchild. It's like, no, come on, now you could do this. You could do this. And sure enough, it's, 6 months later, 9 months later, oh, I've been thinking about taking lessons. Oh my gosh, you were here 9 months ago and I was talking about lessons. Yeah, you should do it. Yes. The grandkids, and I'm kind of like, so I just have such admiration for people who can get over that sort of whatever resistance it is. I don't know. I'd love to hear your perspective. There's, of course, different personalities, but I have to think, people wouldn't admit it as readily, but some of that resistance is almost like a fear of the challenge of it, or that it's not going to turn out that they wanted or whatever. But what's your experiences without the psychology of adults taking on these challenges?
Well, I think as we get older, we are all thinking more about doing everything correctly. We judge ourselves,
Hmm.
and we're often judging ourselves before we're even doing it.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think the successful adult beginners that I've worked with have been able to get beyond that. And of course, the children just sort of just will do it,
Hmm.
and they're not worried about looking, you know, uh, foolish. But
Yeah. People love it
sometimes
when they look
adults,
foolish. They think it's cute.
yeah, yeah, that's right. So there is that psychology, but the adults that I've worked with have really gotten beyond that so well, and in spite of that, they're really doing well.
Yeah. So it's just kind of been a matter of the initial hump of kind of like getting going. And then once they're in it, they see the benefits, they see how, the resistance can be overcome, and then they just plow forward. Yeah.
There are also people that start it and don't realize how difficult it's going to be. That is the other thing, that they will. It kind of looks easier maybe than they think it is once they get going. So there are always those that kind of come and start and then kind of realize that maybe it's a little too much of a commitment.
Hmm.
But
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The unconscious incompetence, unconscious incompetence. Then you have the conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and then the unconscious competence. But yeah, it's very easy
Yeah.
to kind of step. Oh, I can do this. Okay, no, I don't. Not so good.
But step by step, it's breaking it down. If it's broken down and people have enough patience to take one step and then the next step and the next step, and it's built, it can be done. I mean, that's kind of the key, is having enough patience, being willing to invest in it enough to kind of go through those steps and be patient and let one step uh, get there, and then you go on to
Mhm.
the next one. So
Yeah,
that pacing is very important. Yeah.
it's too bad the adults don't have their parents to do the lessons with them. um, I'm curious about, if there is any difference. I mean, clearly there's going to be a difference in the methodology that you take. There's going to be a similarity, but there's things you don't have to explain to an adult as much as you do to a child, because they're a child, they don't know as much. But what are the differences and similarities between the approaches and the sequencing with the children versus the adults? You go through the same thing, you go through the same lessons. Can they do it more quickly, or is it a matter of, no, you kind of go at the same pace anyways because you got to get the fundamentals down? Is there an adjustment for adults and children, or is the process basically the same?
Well, the repertoire can absolutely be the same just because it's set up so well.
Hmm.
Um, and the adults, many of them already read music, and then that's great. And then we can put that right in. They can put the notes up there. If they don't read music, it's not a problem because we can kind of introduce that. Um, and the young children were developing their ear kind of at that point. And I
Hmm.
will also I'll have students that have maybe started in the public school sometimes and haven't ever had private lessons, and they come to me. And so what I'm doing is trying to fine tune and kind of go back and kind of build that foundation for them, that maybe because they were in a class situation, they weren't able to really take
Hmm.
those steps. So and for those, so the older kids, you can put the music up there. You're still trying to approach it in a way that they're listening, obviously, and you're trying to like play a phrase for them and say, can you play it like this? Can you match that? And but it really is different, and of course every student is different, and every student has a different way they're coming to it, and even within the same age, you're doing things differently depending on the type of student and what's going to unlock that that thing that's going to help them
Yes. Yeah, and I can imagine the parents are going to affect it, whether you like it or not, right? Some parents are going to have musical experience, some aren't. Some are going to be busier, and some aren't. So I'm sure that affects it as well. You're also, probably this is coming from my neuroscience background, and there's plasticity, brain plasticity questions that come up. People claim that it's harder to learn a language when you're an adult, for biological reasons. I've often been a little bit skeptical, that is as much of an impact as people want to believe it is, who are kind of resistant to taking these things on, or making the mistakes and things like that. Personally, I think that a lot of the obstacle is in the people being afraid to get in the zone of making mistakes. I think that makes it difficult to learn new languages and new skills, more than the fact that the brain itself has crystallized in some other way. But what I wanted to ask you specifically, and maybe anecdotally here, is when you get the adults in, because Suzuki is so sound focused and ear training focused, do you ever notice with an adult versus a kid, the kid, it's just like all these sounds are just kind of landing in their brain and they're figuring it out, and it's so natural and cohesive, whereas there's an adult and you're giving them the same stuff, but that it's just not landing as easy. It's not landing on such a soft place where you can make an impression. Have you found that difference, or maybe people already come to you with a relatively good ear most of the time?
I haven't necessarily found that. I wouldn't say I found that. I haven't noticed it. The students, a big part of what the young children do is listen to the recordings, the Suzuki recordings every day, so that gets into their ears, so that by the time they get to the new piece, they've heard it for so long. And of course, we do 2 group classes every month as well. The students are always reviewing the old pieces at the group classes. So the young children are hearing the pieces that are coming up there. They're seeing the older kids playing. But I think it's the same process. And I think that the way I teach, as far as the very beginning with the sound, we build everything up physically. We put the bow on the string, and then I'm playing that twinkle rhythm, tucka tucka tucka, at first, and I think it's probably for the cello the same rhythm, and trying to have the student
Mississippi hot dog.
Mississippi hot dog, yeah, and having the student imitate that sound. So I think it's still, even with an adult, it's listening and kind of going for a particular sound.
That's cool. That's reassuring. That's great. Now, you're probably not expecting this question, but it's on my mind. Are you inspired to pick up something that you never really did in your as an adult, some new skill or anything like that, or you just don't have the time? Yeah.
I don't know. I have not thought about that, just because I don't have the time, I guess. I would have to think about that.
I'll give you one, and I have no idea. Maybe you're already in this domain. A couple of years ago, I had a friend who was doing marathons, and I didn't even think I could do marathons. I was 40 or something like that, I guess. And I thought my knees were too bad. I did all these excuses again. But I was talking to him on the phone one day. I said, you know what? I'm going to sign up for a marathon. I started training for it, and I went ahead and I did it. And one of the things that I learned which was fascinating, is that there were a lot of people way older than me that were doing marathon running who had taken it up later in life and even had it described almost as like an old person's thing. And maybe even part of the psychology of it is even the fact that you've been through so much that you just know that if you just keep going, you'll get there. So anyways, if you're not into that, I could recommend that as something interesting that you might be able to make time for.
I do try to work out every day, and one thing that when I moved to Richmond, I started working out with the SEAL team physical training, which is a great program. I sort of, when the pandemic hit, the 9:30 session that I was working out with didn't get was sort of suspended, and that group is working out, and my schedule doesn't allow for it, but I do try to get out on my own and kind of do that. I'm not sure I'm ready for a marathon yet, but we'll see. Maybe in the future.
SEAL team? What is this? That sounds pretty intense.
So
Is
that
it?
was a former Navy SEAL, John McGuire,
Uh-huh.
who got the idea. In a way, there's it could be kind of similar to music as far as that people of all ages can work out together. So the idea that the faster people are running their pace, and then they're going to go back to the slower people who maybe are just starting, or and everybody through that process is a supportive process. Everybody gets better, gradually better, and of course push-ups and sit-ups and all that stuff is involved with it. But it's a great program. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I got sucked into the David Goggins world. If have you familiar with David Goggins?
I don't think so. No.
He's also a Navy SEAL guy, just kind of like super intense. He went through the trainings and, did multiple, terribly hard, trials for the military. And it's kind of his claim to fame. But he started out as an overweight guy watching TV and thinking maybe I'll do it. And then turned into this monster, somebody who couldn't run a block, and he now runs for like, these ultra marathons and stuff like that. Um, Fun stuff. So as we start to kind of wrap up here, we'll wrap up in about 10, 15 minutes, but any any thoughts about what you've seen as a good entry points or places for people to look? Of course, people will check out your blog as an entry point as well, but any books or pieces or record, like sort of albums or anything specific that you found as an interesting way to get people excited, that maybe a listener or a viewer can, well, I'm going to try that out.
Well, I'm reminded of sort of one of the inspiring points in my development when I probably about 10 years old. David Zinman, the conductor, who was music director of the Rochester Philharmonic, it was his last concert with the Rochester Philharmonic before he left for the Baltimore Symphony. And it was Mahler's Second Symphony. And that was a really inspiring concert that I still remember all these years later. So I think anything by Mahler has that tremendous drama, any of the Mahler symphonies. And of course, you hear so much of John Williams' film scores, what he's taken from Mahler and from Gustav Holst with the planets. So I think those dramatic scores are great to great entry points. Yeah, I think that's where I would start probably.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm also struck by this. I want to talk a bit about pianos and violins as well. And we've had, we've had violinists on the program, people who are violinists and conductors, as I think you've even seen, and a violin maker, on the program, a guitar maker who has studied, to be a luthier as well. There's this interesting parallel that I often like to touch upon. You guys have the advantage. You have this ancient instrument, which is sort of revered. It has this classical history and is, made of wood and, strings and tuning pegs and all of these things. And there's a sort of this tradition, right, where things have been passed down through the eras. But man, darn it, yours is so portable. We're so jealous that your instrument can be taken anywhere. Um, and the piano, bless its heart, it's this behemoth that has to be lugged around, especially the finest ones. Um, what what have you had any interesting experiences in terms of finding your instrument, playing different instruments, the fact that it is such a historically connected, organic, instrument?
Well, I'm very lucky. I found a great violin that my teacher, Ole Krisa at Eastman, helped me find it. It's a William Hill violin, and he was an English violin maker back, the date I think is 1894. And of course, everything is built on the model of the Stradivarius, because those dimensions and everything sort of set the standard. So I'm very lucky. The one thing you're talking about, having to move the piano. You have
Portability,
the
yeah.
same piano, you have to move it. Sometimes with the weather changes, I feel like I have a different violin every
Mm-hmm.
day. The way the wood is responding, like what's coming back to me, can
Mm-hmm.
change, and that can be in the humidity in the summer versus the drier air in the winter. Can be a real challenge. So in that regard, we have a little bit of a challenge.
Yes. And actually
But
reminding me when we had the violin maker on, I'm curious if this resonates with you. I would have no idea really, but she was saying the sound of the instrument will actually change based on who's played it. So not just like, hey, I know how I can play a violin, I'm going to make it sound this way. Okay, I can't play it as well, I'm going to make it this sound done this way, or I've got my character, or I've got my tone. But if you were to give your instrument to someone and they would play it for a week or something, and then they would give it back to you, it'd be like, I can't. It sounds different, or like, is that a thing, or can you touch
I'm
upon that?
not sure. I mean, I haven't really experimented with that because I've always just been playing my violin for so many years.
Uh-huh. Okay.
They talk about like the Stradivarius that Nathan Milstein played,
Hmm.
having those qualities. It's hard to say. I mean, it's certainly the way someone is playing is certainly stirring up the molecules a certain way. I would think. Once in a while, when I'm listening in the orchestra to woodwind and brass players and they're playing their solo, I almost can think that I can hear their speaking voice in their sound.
Oh,
I could be
wow.
crazy, but there's just something weird. Once in a while, so even when they're playing another instrument, I just hear their kind
Hmm.
of voice a little bit
Hmm.
once in a while. Not with everybody, but it happens every now and then.
I mean, that does. I mean, it sounds kind of crazy, but it also sounds feasible. Um, the reason people have a characteristic voice is because of, the shape of their mouth and their teeth and, all of these things that they can't really change that much. Of course, there's the resonance of the vocal cords but I mean, I guess you could even think about it even to lung capacity and lung shape and all of those
I think
things
the
seem.
personality also, the personality is coming
Mhm.
out a
Yeah.
little bit, and that's probably what I'm hearing, the personality of the voice. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I
that's
listen to
cool.
everything with music, and I try to approach the blog this way, and not with specific people's voices, but with voices.
Mm.
So, we can think of music as being chords and counterpoint, but if you listen to something like the Mozart Jupiter Concerto or a Jupiter Symphony, the last movement there's there are actually voices that are interacting, that are conversing.
Mm. Yes.
And I listen to music that way. I kind of approach it that way.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and in fact, in our recent show with Nikki Choi last week, we got to see a performance where he was playing with his brother, and it was a piece that had sort of not exactly dueling violins, but kind of like commenting on each other, interplaying, and I don't know if it was that he prefaced it by mentioning it was his brother and kind of gave a hint that there was some sort of a battle going on or whatever, but it immediately, as we were listening to it, it evoked this kind of conversational, maybe even dramatic argument type of sense about it, and it was very much uh enriching in that aspect of saying, oh, there's voices here, there's voices, and you talk about it all the time, but it's very also specific. I think the playing of the individuals, like you said, they have their intonation, their tonality, their specific actual voice, and if you've got the right chemistry of it, it can really make magic.
Mhm.
That's cool. All right, well, we'll be signing off here momentarily. We've mentioned some places where people can go to find out more about you, but it doesn't hurt to recap or highlight any final words of wisdom as well, or exhortations. Hey, go do this or that, advice, stuff like that. How would you like to close things out, and where would you like to send us?
Well, I don't really have any words of wisdom, but it's been a real pleasure talking to you. It's been so much fun, and um, I look forward to exploring more of your podcasts because have started to look through your library, which is growing. You do this every week.
We're here every Saturday, and sometimes we have to pre-record a session, but it's been pretty consistently every Saturday for, gosh, I don't know, 5 years now. So, yeah, lots of good stuff. And increasingly, we'll bring on, like I said, classical musicians, violinists, conductors, guitarists. Actually, we probably could stand to get a little bit more into the woodwinds, to be honest. We haven't had a lot of those, but woodwinds and brass. So we'll go in that direction soon. All right. Well, thank you very much. I hope people go check out your blog and your website and the Richmond Symphony if you get a chance as well. And yeah, thanks very much. I'll do our outro and we'll see you on the flip side. I'll close out the Zoom. If you want to jump back on the same link after that, you and I'll do a quick one-on-one wrap up. But I will say thank you to you, Timothy, as well as our live audience here for joining Piano Tech Radio Hour today. We've reached the end of another musical journey. As always, we're brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, cutting edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. If you join us today by signing up for this session individually, make your life more convenient. Subscribe to Piano Tech Radio Hour at $16 a month. You get the recording of today's session and a member area automatic registration for each week's news session signed by bit.ly/join PTRH, bit.ly/join PTRH. Check out the podcast and the blog on Substack and all the socials, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. See you all